Hi, I'm Baldur Brönnimann, and this is the Conducting Coaching podcast, where we talk about conducting from the inside. Hey conductors, today in the Conducting Coaching podcast we'll look at something that maybe most of you had a look at some stage, which is conducting competitions. We'll have a look at a few things like what competitions are around, what they can do for you, how they work, and a few tips how you can prepare for them. Béla Bartók famously said, competitions are for horses, not for musicians. I totally agree with that, but competitions are a fact. They're there and they're something we have to look at. If you're thinking about applying for a conducting competition, you better be clear what a competition can do for you. There are all sorts of stories around, a competition making you instantly famous, you having a lifelong worldwide career and so on because of a competition win. I think one has to be realistic about that. That's not very likely to happen. A great career will depend on many more things than just simply winning a competition. If you look through the historic lists of prize winners at conducting competitions, some had great careers, some had no career whatsoever, so everything is possible because a great career will not just depend on one competition. And equally, some of the most significant conductors in the 20th and 21st century never took part or never won any competition. So don't look at a competition as a magic solution for all your career issues. But what a conducting competition can do is it can put you on a map. How big this map is will depend on the kind of competition we're talking about. There are a few big international conducting competitions that attract the eyes of the music business for at least a moment. I think we could say the Malco competition in Copenhagen is one of those. Then one should mention maybe the Gustav Mahler competition in Bamberg, which is quite a young competition, but it got to fame because the very first audition was won by Gustavo Dudamel. And then, the Donatella Flick in London, definitely, because all the big agencies are there, so whoever gets noticed at the Donatella Flick will be in front of a lot of people from the music business. And then there are just a few other ones, maybe the Besançon competition, which is happening every few years since quite a long time, the Georg Scholti competition in Germany, the Fiedelberg competition in Poland. But then we get bit by bit to territory where the competitions are more relevant just on a national level. So if you're looking at some smaller competitions, maybe a bit further away from the center of the professional music business, some of these competitions might still get you some work because they will be relevant on a national level. The orchestras around that specific place will notice, who the winners are, etc. But they won't get you noticed necessarily on a worldwide level. Having said that, I think there are many more reasons to participate in a competition rather than just winning a big international competition and springing to instant fame. I think it might be that you want the experience of taking part in a competition, see how you handle yourselves in a certain situation. You want to get to know different cultures, work in a different type of environment. Or maybe you want to make connections, meet other conductors who participate, because that in the long term is sometimes much more useful than what you actually win in a competition. The professional connections you make. Or maybe you're also looking for some work. It doesn't mean that you need international fame, but if you take part in a certain competition where there are other orchestras attached or other, choir conducting competition, for example, where choirs have their eye on what's going on, competitions might get you some work. And also remember that in a conducting competition, you can't really lose. If you win, that's great. There's a really small chance that that's going to happen, but nobody knows all the people who didn't get anywhere in conducting competitions. Everybody knows this is also pretty subjective, etc. So it can't do you any harm to participate. I would just look at it as a natural way of expanding the horizon of your work, of putting yourselves into the ring and practice what it means to stand in front of an orchestra. If you get chosen to participate in a conducting competition, make sure you make the most of it. You get to make music, you get to be together with friends and colleagues, you can exchange really wonderful experiences, you get to meet different cultures, different people and so on. I think if you look at it from that point of view, conducting competitions can be super valuable experiences. Now, the application process is slightly different for different competitions. Some people have a more practical approach in a sense that they have more people conduct physically and then select them from round to round. Like, for example, the Besançon competition, which does first rounds in different places, to select people by actually seeing them. And other competitions will select more by CVs or videos. From my own teaching and judging experience, I think the more practical approach is definitely more objective. It's definitely better to see people in the flesh, and if it's just 10 or 15 minutes or so, but you get a much better feeling for what somebody is about as a conductor. If you want to know more about the whole application process, have a listen to our Conducting Coaching podcast number 5, where I talk a little bit more about applications and what is important and so on. What is different in applying for a competition rather than a job is that people will not look for the right sort of person. They will just look for the best conductor, or maybe for the conductor that has the biggest profile to have a career and so on. But the personality aspects will be less important. Now, if you have trouble with presenting yourselves, if you don't get selected and so on, have a look at some professional help. That's true for seasoned conductors as well as for people who are just starting out. You want to present yourselves in the best possible way. That's part of how you are seen, and you have to give this its due attention. And if you're stuck, just get somebody to help you with that. Look at your videos, look at your promotional material and so on. Just that everything is geared to giving you as much as possible a chance to succeed in your applications. Now, when you apply for a conducting competition, also look at how their decision-making process is. How do they award the prizes? How do they select people? Who's on the jury and so on? You can't really gear your applications to something like that, but it just gives you a little bit more information. And when you do that, just remember that the first selection very often is done by people who are either not in the jury or just a part of the jury members. So you don't really know what to expect. But the more you know about how a competition works, the better sort of subconsciously you can prepare for it. Now, some competitions have gone a different way, like the Rotterdam competition, which is like really a series of competition in a certain way. Some competitions look at conductors in a more holistic way. There's like a dialogue element involved, sometimes with the orchestra, with the jury and so on. But just make sure before you apply that you're really aware of what's going on behind the scenes. Now, let me just give you a few tips from my point of view how to better prepare for a competition. A competition is something quite artificial. It's not like you have a few concerts and a rehearsal. You have to make your impression in a really small amount of time. So especially in the first rounds, when you do pretty standard repertoire most of the time, make sure you conduct from memory. If you have to do something like, let's say, Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune, everybody will expect you to do this from memory. You need to look up, you have to communicate with the players, you have to feel how they breathe and so on, and also be aware that many people will look at you who are not playing. They look at how you interact, so seeing your face will communicate much, much stronger than looking at the score for 10 minutes. Now, when you look up and when you communicate in these 10 minutes, you want to make sure that your face, your arms, your body is really free to communicate, and your spirit is really relaxed. You're in touch with that sort of specific moment without being frozen. We talked about this a little bit in the podcast about the first rehearsal with a new orchestra. I would recommend a technique called visualization. There are many other names for this. There's something called manifestation, which is quite popular at the moment and which we definitely will look at some stage because it's great for conductors too. But what fundamentally is important that you mentally prepare for that little amount of time you have to show yourselves. You don't want to walk off the podium saying, I didn't really do what I could. And the enjoyment factor there is important because if you can enjoy, it means your spirit is free. Just make sure that you really learned your stuff inside out, that you have this little 10-20% margin that give you sort of security to still be expressive even though you're nervous. Now, obviously, for a competition, you will prepare for a long time, and then the actual time you have on the podium is really short. So make sure you don't overthink. If you're there for a really short time, you look up, you start to communicate, the ideas start to come, and so on. Just let the music take you to places. Because when you get to that sort of flow state, that's exactly when communication comes across as very strong. You really connect. And that's what you want to show in a competition. In order to be able to do that, you have to be 150% solid with the knowledge of a score. It has to be in every fiber, and it has to be in every corner of your mind. And when it is there, then make sure you lay yourselves out, because you have to think that there are many other conductors around. And if you get eliminated or you don't win, then at least go down with your own ideas. Don't play defensive, because you want to stand out from the crowd. It's no use to think about making mistakes, because mistakes you will just make if you lose control. If you risk and you go to a zone where things take over and you might forget something or so. If people eliminate you for something like that, you can't do much about it. But you want to really make an impact in the short time you have. So make sure you don't play defensive. A mistake for a good reason is a good mistake. But when something happens, when something was out of your control or it didn't happen in the way you expected it to, make sure it doesn't throw you off. Sometimes what you perceive as a mistake of yours isn't really seen like that from the outside. But the big risk is that it affects you, that you lose your train of thought or you lose the connection to the musicians or the music for a short time. Looking at this, I think competitions are really valuable situations, because this sort of moment of being under pressure and dealing with, everything that goes on inside, trying to get into that flow state, this you can just practice in a situation where you are actually under pressure. So a competition is really useful to do that. See how you handle yourselves in a really short time with a lot of pressure on, because that experience will help yourselves later in similar situations. Everybody can be a Carlos Kleiber when they're preparing, but you're just as good as your work when you're up there under pressure in the moment working with the musicians. This is a really valuable aspect of conducting competitions, and an experience that will help you later in your conducting life, regardless if you win anything or not. Thanks for listening. To send us your comments or suggestions, please write us a message on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the conducting coaching news and events.